Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Amanda Safdar. I'm the Managing Director of Global Events and Member Services here at IAOP. And I'd like to go ahead and introduce IAOP CEO, Debbie Hamill. Debbie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Again, we have the privilege of bringing you information you can use right now. Today's program is actually a bit of a teaser for much more on the future of governance that we will, along with our partner Avasant, be presenting at Gov20, IOP's virtual forum, October 7th through 9th. And now, Joe Frampis and Naresh Lakmandis will take us through the latest governance trends as told through the lens of the CIO. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat or Q&A feature on your screen. And should you wish to replay today's program or share it with a colleague, the recording of the webinar will be available in IOP's Knowledge Center within 24 hours. Thank you, and now on with the program. Joe, it's all yours.
Thank you, Debbie. Welcome, everyone. My name's Joe Frampis. I'm a partner at Avasant. I have been at Avasant for over 7 years now. Some of my responsibilities, I have several, but one of them is really safeguarding our platform around governance. And in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a solution center that provides some of that. With me today is Naresh Lakmandis, who's been a CIO and a very good friend of Avasant for the last at least 10, 12 years in his roles in CIOs. So Naresh.
Thank you, Joe. Again, my name is Naresh Lakmandis, Joe, just for your benefit.
There you
go. Anyway, so as Joe indicated, former CIO at L3 Conference West, General Atomics in the city of San Diego. I've had a really long-term client-based relationship with Avasant going back to 2006 when I was at Sony Electronics, and then the city of San Diego and L3 Conference West. Bottom line is whenever I had a strategy that I was trying to develop from an IT perspective for my company, I always reach out to Avasant as a sourcing advisory firm to help me confirm, fine tune, and benchmark it so that I can exceed the expectations with my management team. So that's really key for success. They trust, they hear you, but they want to get a third party, in concurrence with that. Coming back to governance and oversight is really critical to ensure success and minimize value leakage. Typically, projects, and we've all managed and had oversight over them, have leakage of 30 to 60% if you're really not on top of the scope and what needs to get done. And governance started with internal IT ops, but with the changing dynamics and increased outsourcing across the landscape, with digital transformation, AI, RP, et cetera, and the hybrid clouds, not just the general cloud out there, but the hybrid cloud environment, the multi-cloud environment. We really need to focus more on that. The traditional, and going back to the traditional model for outsourcing that many of us have dealt with, was basically service levels and lower the costs. I mean, that's how this all started. But now with the technology and the platforms and the services are converging, and organizations really need to shift their thinking from sourcing to partnering with service providers, and to drive a convergence of process and internal organizations to leverage the providers to get you the best business value. So in this new ecosystem, this disruptive competitive landscape, we need to be able to be nimble, be able to react to changing business conditions, and focus more on outcome-based sourcing. I've had oversight over several outsourcing deals over my career, and as a CIO, data center, AMS, help desk, network, et cetera. And those were very isolated to that tower. Everybody was focused on reducing their costs and hopefully some efficiencies. But if you don't focus on governance and oversight, there will be problems. I'll share with you a real life situation when I was the CIO of the city of San Diego. We brought Avasant to help with the strategic sourcing. The objective was to reduce IT spend, and we did get the net result of over 8% annual reduction in IT spend. And Avasant was very, very vocal about governance, the need for it. And about the time the deals were being finalized, I transitioned to my role at General Atomics as CIO out there. I did highlight to the city the need for governance and make sure they put that in place. Well, they decided they didn't need it. It resulted in lots of negative outcomes. And after about 18 months or so, the city brought Avasant back into help assist and fix the issues. So why is this message so important? You know, as we transition to the next gen sourcing, which is really outcome based, where the vendor is basically an extension of the organization by bringing value, key skills and capabilities, how do we qualify that they're delivering and also delivering to ensure the continuity of the business operations? That's really key. And we really need to be aligned on expectations. So Joe, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Naresh. That was a great introduction. So I brought up this first slide only for one reason. I could have told you these challenges 20 years ago. I don't think they've changed that much. Now there has been, and I've highlighted 3 of them because there are changes in that in those particular ones. So what I'd like to, you know, when you talk about lack of data availability and quality, I'm just going to highlight a couple of these. If you look at what has happened over the last 20, 25 years in sourcing and around vendors, the data has quadrupled, even 10 times more. So what's happened is everyone is worried about data. They want to keep their data. They want to be able to make sure that it's available. And what's happened is because of that, we've gotten all this data and there's been no way to get to it. And so, and what's happened there too is when people were saving data, data was, you know, 3 or 4 times the same data in data warehouses. So what's happened with new governance and things that are going on, that has actually improved. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Tracking and assessing vendor performance. As you know, is traditional service levels have always been technology based. You're seeing now that change dramatically, and it's really around assessing the performance based on how they perform for the business. So you're actually seeing many changes there, and I would tell you this is probably one of the biggest governance challenges that have changed and over the past few years. Lack of executive sponsorship, that's always been there. I think more now because the number of vendors and those type of things, it's actually even more prevalent and it has to be looked at properly. Amanda? So what is really driving these? As Naresh talked about, new delivery models, the use of cloud. We have private cloud, you have public cloud. I think you're seeing more and more hybrid clouds. So delivery models are really driving some of this transformation around governance. A new breed of suppliers. What you're seeing there is because of, and I'll talk about analytics too, because you're seeing much more analytics and you're seeing cloud being more prevalent, what's happening, you're seeing new suppliers. If you go back 15, 20 years, you know, there were your major, you know, 10 or 15. Today, I could probably go into the hundreds. You have much more synchronization, much more ecosystem of suppliers. So what that is doing is it's driving that transformation for governance and what's happening there. The other important thing I'll drive out in this particular slide, and all of these are important, since we only have a half hour, I could probably spend an hour just on this slide. But more importantly is risk and regulatory compliance. You are seeing the role of CISOs much more prevalent and much more important in organizations today. So what's happening is that governance is driving, or risk and security is driving how governance is transforming. Now I want to ask you a question, Naresh. In your role as CIO in these, did you have CISOs back in some of the earlier ones and then the later one? And how did they play a role in governance?
So CISOs, yeah, they were there, but their roles have significantly changed from before. Before it's more on just basic governance and the, you know, the whole business continuity and making sure that things are done right. But to me, the new role is really focused on, as you talk about data, and And way back then, there was not so much focus. Yes, there were cybersecurity issues, but a lot of companies, a lot of executives weren't really focused on that. To them, it was just another, situation they didn't want to worry about. But then, as we've seen the whole series of breaches that have come up, as you can see every day now, we read a lot about that every day. There's a lot more awareness on that front. And so the focus of the CISOs and their role has changed significantly going back to the 2009, 2010 to where we are today. So that's what I'm seeing. Joe, I want to come back to something before we leave this thing. When you talk with new delivery models and new breed of suppliers and the hybrid cloud, typically when we do a SaaS type situation and you're getting something on one cloud out here, but now that we have the hybrid model with integrated applications going across all these various platforms, it becomes very difficult for an IT organization to be able to make sure things are being delivered right. So this way, the outcome-based approach of a lot of providers coming into play right now is helping look at the whole picture and give the client, the customer, one dashboard that tells them what's going on and how things are moving. So I think that's really key as you move forward from a governance standpoint as well, to really know what's going on from a delivery and make sure the business is up and running. So turn it back to you, Joe.
Yeah, Jim Rinaldi just commented on, who's on the call here, about CISOs and their roles. And he mentioned that CISOs typically report to the CIO, but, and I see this a lot too, but at the same time is they usually join the CIO at a board level. And I think it's because of that risk and that security. It'd be interesting to know from our audience how people are seeing that, if they see CISOs reporting to CIO, or are they actually reporting to a CFO or a COO? So that's kind of interesting comment. And I think I agree with you, Jim, is I see a lot of CISOs reporting to CIO, but have board responsibilities. Naresh, how is that?
That's consistent as well. And having been in the aerospace and defense world, it's very consistent from that front. But some of the smaller entities don't have it that way. But I think I believe what works for every company is what's important. The CISO's role is ensuring that the business is also aligned and focused on, to go to your point of the executive commitment. The business is also focused on that. It's not just an IT technology side of the fence. It's making sure those things are done. So as long as the two of them can team together and achieve that outcome, that's what's key.
Okay, Amanda. So the next slide really talks about where we're seeing the trends and what's happening around governance. Obviously, with many companies, we're seeing IT becoming much more strategic versus transactional. So it's important to understand that when you're that strategic level, you've got to have the data. You have, as Naresh was talking about, dashboards. You have to have the analytics to be able to give your business those strategic advice. The other thing is being proactive. We always talk about the supplier community or the vendor community being proactive. Governance has to be proactive too. And it's really around your vendors, your third-party risk. It's really around your spend management. I will tell you is I've had some clients that we've done governance that had hundreds of suppliers. And that gets, that value gets lost. The third-party mitigation gets lost. And then what happens is your third-party spend becomes unmanageable. So you have to be it has to be a proactive function, where in the past it never has been. Again, back to the dashboards and what's happening, you see all of these platforms out there now, is the data. You want to be able to make your organization much more informed and decision-making much quicker. So you want governance to be that single source of truth. And so when that truth and transparency will actually follow, and you'll get that. And as a result of that, and some of this is we're seeing governance being much more influential in the business. And so, and it becomes more strategic and with those analytics. And then finally, and again, as the other two, as you might guess, is, you know, obviously governance, you want to be able to demonstrate the cost savings that the supplier community or the vendors have told you that they will receive going with them. So that is very, very important, that the governance goes and demonstrates those costs. And, you know, interesting is that we've always tried to capture cost realization and value leakage through third party. That has always been there, even 20 years ago. And it's even more important now, especially with what's going on in the environments today. You have COVID. People are trying to figure out, okay, what is that cost? What are those things going down? And the third-party relationships are very important, as well as trying to stop any value leakage from them and be able to gain more and more cost savings from those relationships, and, you know, getting the realization of those relationships. Any other comments on that, Naresh? Anything else you're seeing?
Sure. Yeah. So I like to little different twists on what you just talked about, Joe. So there's definitely the cost aspect of it, not denying that at all. But with this next gen sourcing, as we're trying to drive into with working with vendors in this new world, it's also based on outcomes, and the outcomes part is key. And that's what I believe the CEOs and CFOs are looking for. Yes, there's the finance portion, but are we able to achieve our numbers? Are we our sales or our supply chain, depending on what that you know, as part of the process improvements are driving, what the results of there. I actually have I'm not going to go into details, but I was aware of a situation where an SI was looking to offer up to a company to completely outsource the entire IT organization, and was willing to give that company 30% savings in cash right up front. And it's not just about the money, it's also about the value. Can you really deliver? Because if, you know, if I can save money here, but if the, you know, if this is an extension of the IT organization, if you can't deliver, my revenue is going to go crashing down. So it's also a combination of the cost and the value side and the trust and the relationship that you have with the partner. So I think that's a key component as we move forward. It's not just about the cost side of the equation. So my 2 cents on that, Joe.
Right. When Jim mentioned something, and actually, I actually have it there, is the risk mitigation and those type of things that we're seeing trend is very heavily around the risk. Yes. That bringing suppliers into an environment and into an enterprise. Amanda. So I love this particular slide, only because I've been doing this more years than I can count. So if you look at, and this is how I believe it's transforming. If you look at sourcing maturity and those type of things, you look at the traditional things around this, and if you can see, is a lot of attention was paid to the contract, was paid to performance, and really financials. It was always a financial play. And it was very technology SLA based contracts. Relationship and risk, and I put risk in here because it's how important it is today, was not really as looked at around. And these were the early days. Then when you got into a multi-sourcing environment, and this has probably really started happening in the early 2000s, where you had many suppliers running an outsourcing agreement, especially for your larger clients. Contract and finance and performance were still important. But then what was happening in relationship and risk started to really play a role. And the reason for that was because you had multiple vendors sitting inside your environment. And so people were beginning to really look at that. Now, when you get to the digital base, you're getting into all this cloud-based environments. The contract, be it important, and lawyers would probably die when I look at this, is saying that yes, it's important and performance is, but relationship and risk to me and what we're seeing is much more prevalent in these deals because they're becoming more outcome-based contracts. So that in order for that to happen, you have to have the trust, the business has to trust that vendor, especially when they're going to provide them outcomes. And the risk is much more important because you're really relying on that supplier or those vendors to give you, to provide you that comfort and that being able to and to really partake in the risk along with you bringing them into your environment. Now, you've had several things, several CIO stints. Naresh, have you seen this? Because this is through my years doing this, I see this. Did you see that as you progressed through your different roles as a CIO?
Yeah, and Joe, you're absolutely right. And it goes back to that comment I made earlier. The risk part, I was relating to the trust and the ability of that provider to deliver those results, right? Because if you can't deliver, I'm not going to make my revenues or have my inventory in the right place. So that to me is really key as you go forward. Also to Jim's point, enterprise risk management. So I think that's really important from that standpoint.
So, yeah, I'd be interested in if anyone. I mean, I'll open it up for a question because I'd be interested in other people's opinions here because I believe this is happening. And I would be interested to know if anyone who is participating sees this also.
So, Joe, while people are putting some questions in, actually, if you really look at what we just went through over the last few months with this COVID crisis, those providers that were able to literally ensure business continuity during that crisis, given that even some of their analysts, consultants, et cetera, were working remotely and still able to deliver and make sure the systems were available during that crisis. That to me is a phenomenal accomplishment by them to help deliver that. So kind of gives you that part that they will successfully mitigate that risk to go forward. And if it wasn't for the fact that people were on cloud-based environments, et cetera, this would not have been possible. So the technology and the digital transformation that led to that state is probably what made this success for both the client as well as the provider.
So this is how it's going. Okay, so how it's transforming. Amanda, why don't you take us to the next slide? So the next slide is, okay, what is changing? I'll tell you, let's talk about contract structure. If you look at contracts in the past, they were huge. I mean, they were hundreds of pages. You're seeing now more and more contracts becoming standard, becoming shorter, and becoming much more simple. I think because of that, I think you're seeing, and that's why I think you see a lot of players too, because if you looked at the traditional outsourcing, I mean, it was huge. And now you're seeing, I think you're seeing them much more simpler. You get into the relationships. The relationship, again, is what we're trying to do with these contracts is also drive them with the business and drive them to the outcomes. As we've said, is we've always had technology SLAs. And in some cases, they may be appropriate. But more and more, I think we're seeing, we want contracts and we want the relationships to see is how are they benefiting the business. And so they're benefiting the business with the outcomes. And so you want to control those and you want to be able to make sure that whatever contracts you come up with, it really does deal with outcomes and not with, well, we're 99%, uptime on a server. Well, that's nice, but does it do anything for the business? Obviously, financials will always be important. There's nothing, you can never get around the financials. And so we want to be able to look at those financials, and you're looking about, to me, more important is the traceability and tangible deliverables. I think that is really, really important for the environment and for the businesses to get what they've actually paid for. Performance and risk are also very important here. You know, as you know, we've been touting for the last 20 minutes, is performance measures are tough to do. I mean, a lot of people, it's taken several years now, but we're beginning to see them become much more prevalent in our contracts. It used to be, and what was happening is people said, well, it's just too hard. Just give me, what's a server? How long does the network have? Well, that's great, but you know, everyone knows, everyone that deals with governance, and you hear it all the time, is great. We're measuring all these things, but have they really progressed in our enterprise and our environment? And I will tell you, 9 out of 10, no. So you really have to spend time around business metrics, and they're tough and they're hard to do, but it's changing. And then finally, the risk. You know, with risk, you know, with all these people, with all these all these different enterprises and suppliers, risk is important here. And so not only do you have to have really good policies inside your enterprise, you have to be able to make sure that your vendors and your suppliers adhere to them and make them easier for them to work inside your environment, but making sure that you have the controls to be able to make sure that they are complying with what you're doing. Naresh, any additions on what you see changing here?
No, I agree with you. I look at the effort on the contracts and performance being less. It's not saying it's not important. And go back to when you first started to measure all this about 100 years ago when you was first doing your governance stuff. But back then, the only metrics you could measure was the uptime on service, right? But now in this day and age, with all the data that's available, it allows the dashboards and the consistency in how we work with vendors to make it a lot simpler. So yes, the effort is less, it's still important, but you're right, the risk management and the relationship management is key as we move forward. So 100% concur on that front, Joe.
And I knew we'd run out of time, but Amanda, let's show the last slide. You know, so you think about, and it comes down to 3 major pieces. When you're looking at the governance function, it's really looking at enhancing your partnerships. You want your partners to be flexible. You want them to be agile. You want them to be engaged on win-win scenarios. But more importantly, I will tell you is, and I see it all the time, is you need to look at vendor consolidation. You know, and my guess is, especially larger entities, you probably have way too many suppliers. So I would look at those partnerships and enhance them. The second thing is optimizing the business value. If you have to be able to do that, because what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to be that business to look at you as a partner to be able to help their strategic business goals. And finally is you need to continually improve. Just like we tell the suppliers, you have to be able to do that. So it's very important for that. So it's actually time, Amanda. I don't know if we have any time for questions or if people want to be able to do that. Have had a couple questions. These slides will be available to you because we will, I believe Amanda will put these on to the website for you to take. So yes, these will be available for everyone. With that, I mean, our time is up. I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything they would like us to clarify or more important, but that is what we have for you today.
Well, wonderful, Joe and Naresh. Thank you so much. This has been a really informative, really fantastic webinar. I will review any of the questions that didn't get answered. We'll make sure to get those answers for you. And as Joe mentioned, this will be available both on our website and through our newsletter shortly. Thank you all so much for attending, and we hope we see you in a couple weeks at governance. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.